and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to talk through the elements and principles of design. I thought it would be good for you to have these written down. So I will put them all down below in the description, and I'll also pop them on my blog if I get time. With both the elements and the principles of design, really you sort of do a lot of them automatically. You don't actually consciously think about them all the time, but it's good to have them there as a reminder, and it's good now and again to just think, has this picture got everything that I want it to have in regards to the elements and principles? And a lot of this comes into your composition right at the beginning when you're deciding what to do in the planning stages. So I'll begin with the 4 elements, and these are all words and things that we've touched on before in a lot of the other videos, and you'll hear me refer to, and some of them are really obvious and some of them not so obvious. But the 4 elements are pretty obvious. So the first one is colour. So at the beginning of any picture that we're doing, we think about our colour scheme. So we've talked before about the colour wheel, and if you use things on the opposite side of the colour wheel, how they contrast, so that can make quite a dramatic painting, whereas things next to each other on the colour wheel can be much more harmonious. And the way colours relate to each other, the way some colours recede, some colours come forward. We all know that yellow tends to jump forward, much brighter colours. Pale blues tend to recede, so we use those further back in the painting. So there's all sorts of things to learn about colour, but we all have our favourite colours, we all see colour differently. So really that becomes a very much a personal preference thing, and we develop our own palette, and that's part of developing your own style, is developing your own colour palette as well. So experiment with all the colours that you've got. If you've got some colours in your tin that you don't normally use, give them a go and see what you can do, and try mixing them with other things. Don't mix more than 2 or 3. 2 is probably a good number of colours to mix together to have a bit of an experiment with. So colour's the first thing, and there's a lot to learn about colour. The second element, and these aren't in any particular order by the way, none are more important than others with these elements, is form. So form is pretty obvious. That's the shape, not just of the picture of the whatever you're drawing. And a picture does need some form to it. Even if it's abstract, even if it's impressionistic and very loose, it needs a little bit of form to it to give it some structure, to draw the eye in of the person that's viewing it. So think about the form, the main form. The third thing is space, and so this goes along with form really. We also need, as well as the form of the whatever we're drawing, we do need to leave some space as well. This rests the eye as well and can lead the eye around the picture from one form to another. So think about where your space is and not just cramming the whole painting. And then the fourth element is texture. So we want some nice areas where it's nice and smooth looking, soft lines against some hard lines, and introduce some texture and some variety into the painting. So those are the 4 elements: colour, form, space and texture, and pretty obvious what they mean really. But like I say, it's good to have these things written down. Now when you go more in depth, and again you don't think about these things every time you do a painting, but they will become more and more in your mind as you go along, as you learn more and as you're doing more. And these are the 7 principles. And again, these are in no particular order, but we'll start with harmony. I did touch on this with colour. So when you use colours that are on the same, next to each other on the colour wheel, you'll get a very harmonious painting. And again, if you don't have things that are jarring with each other, and if you move smoothly from one line to the next, and you use the same colours throughout the painting. So it's harmony not just with colour, harmony with other things as well, with your lines and the media that you use. You can make a much more harmonious painting. Now, on the opposite side of this, you could do something completely unharmonious that's really intended to make people look. So think about it both, is it harmonious, or is it maybe you don't want it to be harmonious? So we'll come on to the second thing, scale. So it's pretty obvious in a way, scale. You don't want, if you're drawing a cow and a duck, you don't want the duck to look bigger than the cow. So that's one thing that we need to, a lot of beginners seem to get this wrong, particularly when they're drawing people in settings against trees and houses and things like that. Where they are in the picture, how far back they are, the scale can look quite wrong. So pay particular attention to the scale when you've got things like buildings, trees and people and animals all together in one painting. The next thing is balance. Again, you don't want the painting to look top heavy or bottom heavy. You want the balance to be well, not necessarily in the centre, I was going to say in the centre, but you want it to not be disconcerting to the eye. So think about, we're not talking about literal balance, as in when you're using scales and you're talking about a visual balance. So if you've got an area of perhaps of a very big block of dominant colour, then another area is very sort of loose and wishy-washy, the eye's going to go to that and it's going to make it heavy in that area. So think about balancing it with something else, maybe a similar colour in another area of the painting. And then we come to contrast. So again, contrast isn't just about colour and tone, it's also about contrasting line and style. So we might have some areas where it's very smooth and gentle, some other areas where you've got very bold lines, very, very dark areas against very, very light areas. So contrast makes the painting much more dramatic and more interesting. You create interest when you get good contrast in your painting. So one thing the beginners do a lot is they're frightened to go very dark. And if you don't go very dark, you're not going to get that contrast with your very lightest highlights. So don't be afraid to make those dark shadows very, very dark. Dominance is the next thing. And again, that comes back to something I touched on with balance. If something's too dominant, it can throw the balance of the picture. So, but also think about which thing you want to be dominant. Where do you want to draw the viewer's eye? Which is the most important focal point of your picture? So look and think, if it's the face of a person, you might put more detail in that person. You might use some directional lines to draw the eye towards that face. So just think about where you want to draw the viewer's eye and which area of your painting you want to be dominant. The next thing is proportion, and this is similar to scale in a way. You want to get all your proportions right. So this is, with scale we're talking about things against each other, like I said, a duck against a cow. With proportion you're talking within that one form, so the proportion of my hand to my face, things like that, and you don't want that to be wrong. So this all comes to measuring. So even if it's quite abstract or quite impressionistic, it still needs to be convincing, and this is why we need to learn to draw before we learn to paint. So think about things like proportion, balance and dominance. Get your drawing right first. Okay, and lastly, rhythm. And I think this is a really important thing to have in your painting. So you think about rhythm, you're thinking about music and what the heck's you talking about. But when you're talking about rhythm, you want some repetition in your paintings. So maybe a line of a fence, a line of some trees is a very obvious thing to have in a landscape. But even in an abstract or in something less obvious repetition, you might have a repetition of colour or a repetition of a shape going throughout your picture, and that just leads the eye and gives it some rhythm. You might have some nice lines that go all the way through the painting in a colour or even just in a line. So think about that as well. Now don't, every time you do a painting, don't think about all these things, but just have them in the back of your mind, and just look at your painting and think, is it harmonious? Is it too dominant in this area, or am I leading the eye to the area where I want it to be dominant? How is my colour scheme? Have I used too many colours? Is it too busy? Just keep these things in the back of your mind as you're going along, and it will also help when I'm doing other videos and I mention these words for you to know what I'm talking about. So I will, like I say, I'll pop all that in the description below, and hopefully get time this week to do a little blog on that as well, and if I do, I shall link that at the end of the video as well. Okay, so I hope those of you who are beginners found that useful, and these elements and principles relate to all forms of art, not just painting. Whatever you're doing, they relate to that, so whichever media you're working with. Thank you again for joining me. Don't forget, I've got new videos coming out every Monday and Thursday, and if you haven't subscribed, if you'd like to do so, that'll keep you updated with the latest videos. Bye for now, and I hope to see you again soon.